Bees had been living in this washing machine in someone's backyard for nearly a year, and I was called to remove them. The homeowners upcycled this old washer and turned it into a compost bin, but then bees turned it into their home. The bees were using the opening in the back of the washer as the entrance to their hive. The homeowner actually lifted the lid of the washer a few days before and got stung, so they wanted the bees to have a new home. After giving the bees a bit of smoke at the entrance of the hive, I slowly lifted the lid and looked inside. What I found inside the washing machine was a beautiful hive and a gentle colony of bees. The bees had filled one side with comb, and you can see here they got creative and built comb in a few different directions. There was also a good amount of honey, which would all be saved for the bees. I got to work removing the comb, starting from the outside and working my way in. The first pieces of comb I grabbed were mostly filled with nectar, which I didn't want to leak out into the new hive, so I put them in a bucket. Everything that didn't go in the new hive went into this bucket, and everything in the bucket would be offered back to the bees. This piece was full of capped honey, so it went straight into a feeder in the new hive. After pulling a few more pieces of comb with mostly honey on them, I reached the brood nest. This is the part of the colony that I always want to save the most. So I started to carefully put the pieces of comb into frames which went into the new hive. The brood nest is where the queen lays eggs and where baby bees develop and are born. A healthy queen can lay up to 2,000 eggs per day, and each individual baby bee larvae will be checked on by nurse bees up to 1,300 times a day. That's why these pieces of comb are always covered with bees. Those are nurse bees, and I want them to stay with the brood nest and go directly in their new hive. I usually have to trim or cut these pieces of comb to fit my frames, and it's one of my least favorite things to do during a removal. But the goal is always to maximize the amount of resources that the bees take from their old hive to their new hive, and of course, to minimize bee loss. We give the bees these wooden frames in a beehive so that they can build comb on them, and so as a beekeeper we can move things around in a hive without disrupting the bees too much. And when it comes to these pieces of comb from removals, the bees will attach them to the wooden frames, then they'll fill in the gaps with fresh comb, and they'll chew through the rubber bands and drag them out of the hive when they're through with them. It's remarkable to see how quickly they can build or repair a hive, especially during this time of year, when the colony's population is at its peak and when the queen is laying more eggs than ever. The bees are working extra hard this time of year while the flowers are blooming and while the weather is good. They're trying to collect as many resources as they can, and they're always working to expand their colony so that they can thrive. When I took a look inside the washer, I saw more capped brood with female baby bees waiting to emerge and start their lives as worker bees. You can see here the hive was full of them, which meant that the colony likely had a strong queen. I started to get really excited at this point because it looked like such a healthy colony, and I was so glad to be able to give them a new home so that they could continue to do the important work they do, and also so that I could study and observe them further. I just kept picking up piece after piece of great-looking comb, and some of the pieces were pretty gigantic, like this one. I used the lip of the washer as my workstation to trim down the comb and to fit it into my frames. Sometimes I lay my frame on top of the comb like I'm doing here to trim it to the perfect size. Bees have pretty hard exoskeletons, and they don't want to be crushed any more than I want to crush them, so they'll usually just move out of the way on their own. If I need them to move off the comb a little quicker, I could give them a little bit of smoke. I had my smoker going nearby, but since these bees were calm and I actually wanted most of the bees to stay on the comb or inside the washer, I didn't need to give the bees much smoke at this point. As you can see, some of the pieces of comb fit almost perfectly into 2 frames when I cut them in half. This made it easier on the bees, and it also made my work go a little quicker. By this time I was about halfway through removing the comb from the washing machine, but I still had to get the bees in the new hive and find the queen. It was around noon and about 95 degrees Fahrenheit that day, which is one reason you don't see me in more protective gear like a bee suit or bee gloves. I always wear protective equipment when I need to. But as you can see here, these bees were not trying to sting me, and I could work alongside them more comfortably in less gear on this particular day. Since some pieces of comb had a lot of honey at the top, I would flip the comb upside down so that the weight was on the bottom, giving it more stability and making it easier for me to put it in the frame. However, I always try to respect what the bees have built, and so I put everything in the new hive in the same order and orientation as I found it, or as close as possible. I'm always trying to think like a bee and trying to figure out what the bees would do or how they would want something done. It's a privilege to be able to go into their hive like this, and it must be done with care. With that in mind, I flipped the frame right side up again, and I placed it in the new hive. I did the same thing with the second part of this comb. It fit nicely into the frame, and I turned it upside down to make it easier to secure with rubber bands. There's a lot of repetition to the bee removal process, but it's important not to rush it and to take your time. You figure out what works best for you and the bees and for the space that you're in, and you just do the best that you can for them. If you're doing a good job, sometimes they'll let you know, and if you're doing a bad job, they'll definitely let you know. Here's what the washing machine looked like when I was about halfway through. At this point, I still hadn't seen the queen, but I felt confident she was still in the washing machine, so I got back to work. There are a lot of different techniques and methods that people have to remove bees, and there's no set of step-by-step instructions to follow since every bee removal situation is totally unique, and in the end, it's really all up to the bees. I think that the right way to remove bees is the way that causes the least amount of harm and stress to the bees and to the people, pets, and property around them. It should be up to each individual beekeeper to choose how they do a bee removal so that the bees and everyone else feel safe. This work takes a lot of practice, patience, and skill, and it should be left to beekeeping professionals. As a full-time professional beekeeper, I think that I have the best job in the world. I like to think that I'm working alongside the bees and we're all trying to reach the same goal of the health and wellness of the colony, especially in these bee removal situations. Even though I'm going through their home piece by piece, and even though I'm cutting through this beautiful comb, I'm trying to do it all as carefully and intentionally as I possibly can. I recognize that the bees have worked hard for a long time to build their hive and have a healthy colony. And since these bees had been living in this washing machine for almost a year, and since this bee removal was during the peak of the season, they had a lot of valuable resources to remove and relocate. You can see that I already had one full box of comb at this point, and it would be time to add a second box to the new hive. Once I had this piece of comb in the frame, I put rubber bands around it and carefully put it in the new hive along with the rest. Each piece of comb I removed was covered with more bees, food, and brood than the last, but still no queen. I continued to remove the final pieces of comb and cut them to put them into the frames. Because of the way the bees had built the comb in so many different directions, it made it more difficult to find the queen, so I wanted to get as much of it out of the way as I could before I started to remove more bees. Sometimes I get lucky and pull a piece of comb out and spot the queen right on top. But there were so many good places for her to hide in this washing machine, I thought the queen would try to stay in the machine for as long as possible. The bees were also not giving me any signals that she had moved somewhere else, but as I neared the end, I noticed a lot of the bees themselves were moving somewhere else. They were moving to the backside of the washing machine. This is what that looked like. It was pretty much a solid wall of bees, and it was pretty cool to see from above because I usually don't get that vantage point. Since it was hard for me to get to the back side of the washing machine, I thought I would start by removing bees from the inside of the washer first. So I just started to scoop bees up with my hands and put them into the new hive. Most of the time I can do this without the bees stinging me, and this time was no different. As I was scooping bees and searching for the queen, I saw something pretty cool happening. I saw this undertaker bee carrying a dead drone pupae out of the hive. Every bee in the colony has a job, and it was this bee's job to move dead bees out of the hive to make way for new bees. I really hadn't removed too many bees from the inside of the washing machine at this point, but I had my phone out of my pocket to take the previous video of the Undertaker beat, and to take this quick video to show y'all what it looked like in there. As I was taking this video and watching the screen, I suddenly spotted the queen. This is exactly how she was when I first saw her. I'll give you a moment to look for her, but she's mostly covered up by other bees, and you can really only see a tiny portion of her abdomen. Her beautiful reddish coloring is what caught my eye, and there she is. No matter how many removals I do, the feeling of finding the queen never gets old. It's always a relief to know she'll be safe for the rest of the removal and for the move, which is why I put her in this clip. The worker bees can still access her and care for her, but because she's the largest bee, she can't escape. I put the clip in the hive and in she goes. Then I took a piece of the cover of the hive and I made a little bee bridge for all the bees to crawl into their new hive. Since the queen was now in there and most of the colony was still in or on the washing machine, they would be eager to join their queen, and I wanted to make it as easy on them as possible. I used what little smoke I had left in my smoker to herd them into the new hive. Bees react to smoke the same way as other creatures and they move away from it, so at this point I just waited for them to move into the new hive. I got the second part of the cover to the hive, but as you can see, the beehive is still completely open in a number of places so that the bees have easy access to the hive and to their queen, including the bee bridge that I made for them. I also helped the bees along a bit by scooping a few more handfuls of bees off the washer and into the hive. As a kid, I was always scooping up any bug I could find, and my first reaction whenever I saw an insect was to ask if I could pick it up. So in many ways, I really just feel like I'm living all of my childhood dreams by getting to do this every single day. For me, scooping bees just seems like one of the most humane methods of quickly getting bees out of one place and into another. This is what the inside of the washing machine looked like at that point. There were still a lot of bees and I still had some cleaning up to do. And this is what the outside looked like. As you can see, the smoke and having the queen in the new hive made all the bees want to move into the new hive. I made sure everything looked okay, and I actually left the hive for the rest of the afternoon so that I could give the bees plenty of time to move in. The idea was that all the forager bees that were out collecting food would come back and hopefully go to the new hive. I returned as close to sunset as I could and I was so happy to see my plan had worked. I still needed enough daylight left to get the bees into my truck, drive us home, and get the bees situated in the apiary, so I got back to work and I strapped some bungee cords around the new hive. Then I got my cart to help me move the hive out of the backyard. Because I'm of pretty small stature and since I work alone, I use this cart all the time to help me haul hives. I placed one corner of the hive on my boot, then I grabbed under the hive and lifted it into the cart as carefully as I could. Lifting a hive always makes me hold my breath for a second until I get the bees safely where they need to be. As you can see, most of the bees were in the new hive, so I rolled the hive through the yard and to my truck. I lifted the hive into my truck and it was time to take the bees home. I had about an hour drive home and I was racing daylight, but as soon as I got home, I drove right to my apiary and I carried the hive from the bed of my truck and placed it on this stand alongside all the other colonies in my bee yard. In a few days after the bees had started to claim the new hive as their home, I would release the queen from the queen clip. These bees can choose to move on if they want, but in my experience, the chance that they stick around their new hive increases if you leave the queen in the new hive for a few days, giving the colony plenty of time to get comfortable in their new home. It was a long day of helping bees under the hot summer sun, but I was really happy to be able to give such a strong colony of bees a better chance for survival than living where they were no longer wanted. They were welcome to stay in my apiary forever, and I would try to give them everything they needed to thrive. They were now in a safer place for them to continue to do the important work they do, and it was another great day of saving the bees.